Most people know what these are, or at least they've seen them before. But what if I told you your MBTI type is made up of much more than just these 4 letters?
Today, I just want to explain what exactly these cognitive functions are for anyone who may be new to this community or anyone who feels like they still don't have a good grasp of the MBTI basics. But in order for us to really understand the fundamentals of this study, we need to go back a few decades.
So in the beginning of the 20th century, a Swiss psychologist named Carl Jung wrote a book that he titled Psychological Types, where he basically documents his findings on the different mental processes he observed in his clients. In essence, Jung took a very philosophical approach. Among the terms he describes introversion, extroversion, fantasy, but most notoriously what he calls functions. Basically, what Jung proposes is that human consciousness can really only operate in 2 possible ways. The first method is through what he calls irrational functions, and the second through what he calls rational functions. By rational functions, he means when the mind engages in an active process of analyzing information, either in a logical way or an emotional way. In simple terms, rational functions look at information and determine whether it's true or false, or good or bad. Essentially, they make a judgment. So what do irrational functions do? Basically everything else. Irrational functions are not contrary to reason. They simply create the awareness or perception of information. A crude example of this is, well, you're watching this video right now. The mere perception of this video, the recognition of its existence, and the experience of this information in your mind, like the sound of my voice, all require no judgment. But as soon as you say to yourself, I agree with that, or maybe you disagree, either way, it's now become a rationalization. Of course, we know that when we're dealing with humans, and specifically when we're talking about the mind, things aren't always that clear-cut. Functions don't really operate individually. Perception naturally informs judgment, and vice versa. They often blend together into a mental symphony that continually orchestrates our psyches. But if you're interested to know more about how the different functions interact with each other, check out my video on the 4 quadrants philosophies. So, with both the rational and irrational functions, there are 2 basic modes. For decisions, we have feeling, which is loosely correlated to good versus bad, and thinking, which is loosely correlated to true versus false. And with the irrational functions, we have sensing, which tends to deal with the concrete perceptions of reality, like the bodily senses, facts, and other physical or tactile stimuli and experiences. The last is intuition. This type of function deals with the relationship of information to the user's unconscious mind. It's often spoken about with terms like symbols, patterns, possibilities, future orientation, or instincts. Most simply, it's the subconscious recognition of the connections between information. So what we're left with is the 2 rational functions and the 2 irrational functions. But Jung further divides these 4 modes into 2 more categories, introverted and extroverted versions of all of these functions. And without going super into detail, this basically means where the psychic energy is directed, either outside the self or inside the self. An easy example is feeling. When extroverted, it's concerned with other people's emotions, and when introverted, it's concerned with the subject's own emotions. It's important to remember here that everyone has all 8 functions. We just use them in a different order. Let me show you what I mean. So for example, this is the 4-letter for the INFP, but inside this code, we see what cognitive functions the INFP has in their specific positions within the stack. For simplicity, we could say that the functions are ordered more or less depending on how much they're used, with the first function being the dominant and most used, and the last function being the least used. Now in reality, each function position has a specific nature that colors the way that we use it. That is to say that depending on where the function sits in the stack, it may act differently. Take for example the third function, the tertiary or child function. It's often described as more used than the second function because of how we exaggerate our active dependence on it. The topic of function positions is a fairly advanced topic, and I want to save this discussion for later videos. Now, let me be honest. This book is really complex, and the whole philosophical perspective is really cool and everything, but it doesn't really clear up where exactly these cognitive processes come from. Like, sure, maybe we can notice patterns of behavior that correlate with the cognitive functions. Maybe you can identify with introverted thinking or extroverted thinking, but what is actually happening in our brains to make these processes manifest? But we'll save this discussion for part 2.